Okay, so we are going to move on to our second scenario, the hybrid scenario. So how might we maintain the tight-knit neighborhood schools that we were just talking about while expanding opportunities for high school students? So this scenario creates a single centralized high school campus. It replaces or renovates all existing elementary, middle, or K-8 facilities, again, using that dashboard, that data-driven approach to determine the scope and prioritization for each building. So this looks at one high school campus, 18 neighborhood elementary or pre-Ks, 3 K-8s, 4 middle schools, and 4 specialty facilities. So you still have 30 educational sites. We're maintaining those the current elementary, middles, and K-8s. And so again, each is renovated or replaced to align with that vision of learning and address all of those baseline facility needs. Pre-K here is fully integrated into the elementary and K-8, so the same approach to integrate pre-K as the first school-by-school scenario. And then we're proposing a purpose-built special ed facility on the former Dearborn High site. So when looking at the elementary schools, this is it's the same map that you saw. The main takeaway is pre-K or main highlight integrated into each elementary school. What you're seeing again is that dashboard in space for the elementary level. K-8, same as the school by school, the 3 K facilities. The change here, actually there's one clarification. We are proposing to convert Fortson to a K-8 facility in this scenario, because Fortson would now be part of, in terms of the school, as a one campus high school approach, but the building we would keep and renovate that to be a K-8 school. Middle school, we're maintaining that status quo while updating the facilities. And then for high school, again, we would have a new centralized high school that would include all of the students, but they could be broken up, and the 3 high schools could still have their individual identity in this campus approach. The specialty schools, you're seeing a concentration on the west side still, but we are suggesting that purpose-built special ed space, and then an additional space that could house programming currently at Howe, such as STEM middle school, and both of those we're suggesting to be on the Dearborn High site. So new buildings could be built there. It's large enough to be able to house both. This is the entire scenario mapped out across the district. 5 properties become vacant when this master plan is complete, and we're looking at 3 buildings in terms of having sufficient capacity to be used as swing spaces. So being able to use those 3 larger buildings would allow that same level of construction, the same pace of construction to occur, and it would be less restrictive in terms of the current capacity of those buildings. So to look at swing space in this scenario a little bit more, we're using existing facilities, suggesting to use existing facilities still to temporarily house students, so the same baseline approach, but they would be different facilities because of the scenario. So we would look at Laurie, Dearborn High, and Edsel Ford. Buildings to prioritize. So how do we free up those swing spaces early enough in the scenario to be able to be used? We would suggest or propose building the new high school campus first, so then the 3 existing high school buildings are left vacant. And then we could renovate Fortson as the new home for Laurie and continue on swinging students in and out as the timeline progresses. So some opportunities and challenges. There would be excess capacity available in some of the swing spaces because they're large buildings. There are opportunities there too, right? So you could potentially swing 2 smaller elementary schools into one of the larger buildings. You could co-locate or adapt and invent new programs to how to live in those facilities. So you have enough space now to be able to accommodate the students and then some. And then there's always the option to construct the new building on site when the room is available. So I believe we mentioned that actually before in the context of Salina previously. So there are 3 schools where we determined the site would be big enough to be able to do that.
Excuse me.
Yes.
With the swing schools that you're talking about in this approach, you've got Lori, Dearborn High, and Edsel. Would it be, and I know you have to renovate them before you swing students in there, but wouldn't it be more expensive and I'm assuming more difficult to renovate a high school building to accommodate elementary schools when you talk about the facilities and everything else?
Great question. So there are different ways we can approach that. So one way would be to really minimally renovate the building. So not gut the building and transform the space, but just to do a light touch to be able to use the space for swing. And so that's actually what we did in terms of building into our cost model to date. Another approach, which we highlight in the third scenario you'll see, is you could actually renovate that building to be the end game. So you could fully gut the building. It could be the future home for a school at the end of the master plan, but then as students swing into that building, they could be exposed to that vision of learning in the meantime. And so it would almost be a professional development opportunity, et cetera, and all the students and teachers that are in that space for those 2 years or so during construction would get to live in that new space. And then it would be the final home for a school.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Trustee Betlishkoff.
Well, just to piggyback, because I was thinking the same thing, putting elementary schools into a high school setting, bathrooms, size fixtures, playground equipment, all those things, were those incorporated into that scenario of utilizing those spaces? Because they're really not made for small little people.
Yeah, that's a great question. And so that would be what that cost per square footage would account for. It would be exactly what you said.
So
It
we'd
would
be investing into a building we weren't going to necessarily be using further down the line just to house them while we were building another building.
True, but I would just offer that this master plan looks at about 30 years. So
Yeah,
the investment
I'll be long gone.
the investment that you're making would be a necessary investment in another school, right? If that school is going to continue on being in use, and it would be minimal. So we would look at really what is the lightest touch possible to be able to make the school usable for that population. But you're right, putting elementary school students in a high school is something to consider just in terms of size and scale, and it's one of the challenges with this approach.
So it's something where you might be making renovations for a 15-year, 20-year time frame, but no more. Right?
Right, and I mean, the life of a playground is a certain amount. So you put in a new playground, but really you'd be putting in a new playground. There's somewhere else, so there are trade-offs.
And no matter what, you're going to have a cost of that transition. I mean, you do need to plan space for where students are going to go. One approach that a lot of school districts use is getting portable classrooms that they would bring on site. And
We already went through, I lived through that one.
yeah, and my point is that the cost of that would actually be more expensive than to do something like this, where you do a light touch to a building that you already have. And so you still are going to have, you will have costs of that transition. And so the point here is we're trying to make use of your existing facilities, doing a light touch, but it would be for a significant amount of time that you'll have that, that you'll be swinging students through. So.
Trustee Watts?
Well, and I think going to the next slide, we're looking at 26 years. So these buildings that we're going to use temporarily is really going to be over decades.
Yes.
Right.
So we're not talking like 5 to 7 years. We're
Right.
saying like it still needs to be, we need to have the cost of maintaining these buildings while the new ones are being built.
Which is a pro, or can be looked at as a pro compared to doing something like portables, which have a different lifespan.
Okay.
So that's another thing to keep in mind.
And
But the community needs to understand that this is not going to be an overnight. When they see 1, 2, 3 years, that's not what this really translates to.
Right, so it's 1, 2, or 3 years per school.
Per school, but
and then what
over.
you see, right, in red, that is the 26 years. That's a great thing
Right,
to
and,
highlight.
and I think we need to make sure everybody's clear on what this would really look like.
Yeah, this is a long-term plan for sure. Yeah.
Okay, so the timeline is not too dissimilar from the school-by-school approach. The same working assumptions were used in terms of the design and construction time and the total cycle. We still have 30 educational sites that we're addressing, and we're making use of 3 large swing sites. So when we mapped that out with those assumptions, we came to 26 years. And again, this is assuming the 6 active projects are constantly running. So if you elected to, let's say, put 2 smaller elementary schools in one of the high school swing sites, that would quicken the time and then assume an additional active project.
I have a question for Tom.
Please.
Is it feasible to think that the district could, on an ongoing basis, afford to have 6 projects running at one time?
Sorry, who that is that question for?
That was for Tom.
Tom?
I'm sorry. Getting ready for the conversation. I'm falling from the villages, so go ahead.
You're getting ready
Oh.
for the fun stuff.
Is it feasible to think, they're talking about running 6 projects continuously at one time to get the 30-year plan done? Is it feasible from a financial standpoint that the district over a 30-year period can work on 6 projects at one time?
I would say not just financial, logistically.
And logistically and everything, yeah.
Logistically, we would have to actually hire more than one architect, more than one CM, because there's only that so much volume one firm can handle, because you don't have firms that have hundreds and hundreds of people.
Okay,
So you would actually have to hire several CMs and several architects at the same time to run these projects concurrently.
okay,
Because standardly, most districts do anywhere from 30 to $50 million a summer, or a year. So when you're looking at this volume, you're going to have several different groups doing the same thing.
okay.
And we did hire different firms at previous bonds. So it's been,
But we're looking on a scale much larger than anything we've done previously.
Right, even the district staff itself couldn't handle that.
Yeah.
We can normally do that volume by our own staff with some of the projects, but we'd have to hire additional staff internally also to help manage that, because you want to make sure it's being run correctly and being done
Right.
correct.
Okay. Thank you. Carry on.
No, I'm good. I was looking at the villages, but I know that's a question that's going to come up at the end.
While you're looking at me, Tom, actually, I do have one. Actually, I do have a question for you then, before we move on. So for the existing bonds that we have, aren't we currently paying for bonds on some of these buildings for renovations that we're
Yep,
then
and
saying that
just
we're
like-
gonna renovate or
Like
tear
Trustee
down?
Ambrosio, there's a financial section later in this presentation.
Okay.
It'd be better to talk about it at that time, once you
Okay,
get the
got it.
numbers in your head.
Perfect.
Okay.
The one question I would bring up is thinking back to some of those previous bonds, how many different projects or new constructions were we doing during any of those ones? Thinking back to those newer buildings, did they come from the same, a couple of them must have come from the same bond.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. The one in 2002 had McCullough Eunice, Gear Park,
And Becker?
Henry Ford. No, Henry Ford wasn't then, I don't think.
Salina Elementary.
Salina, maybe Becker.
no,
Becker's
Becker
way
was
Beck-
in the 90s.
So we might have had 3 or 4 different major projects going on at one time.
Probably about 3, I would say, yeah.
Okay.
I
So we-
remember going in Salina and McCullough Eunice with a hard hat.
Yeah,
So we still have some institutional
My husband
knowledge of
worked
what
at McCullough
what's
Eunice,
gonna
so.
happen if we go forward that way.
At that time, you also had major renovations going on at all 3 high schools during the
Yeah.
'03 bond. So you had major renovations at all 3 high schools, the Berry Center being built, the
oh, yeah, I forgot. that.
Salina being built, and McCullough Eunice being built, and then the final project was Gear Park. But there was a lot of overlap during all of that construction for all of those projects.
So because of the timing of that, really what we're saying is the only way the parents of current students know about it is if they were in the buildings when we were dealing with it. Because 20 years is a long time frame for people to try to relate to. Okay. Anything else before we finish up these slides? Trustee Petlicoff?
Yeah, how much acreage do you need for our high school campus?
Great question. We're estimating about 100.
And I saw on the map what looks like Fairlane Town Center as a location. How did you select that?
It's an area that has that amount of square footage, so it aligns with the needs for the district.
But it's a piece of property that is owned currently by a investor
Yes, and
who just bought it.
Yep, our
a
understanding
couple
was,
of months ago,
yes.
and he's been known to buy distressed malls. I'm just curious as to why how that property got selected in this, was this selected just recently as the location or were you looking at it when you started talking about?
We've been following it since we started engagement with Dearborn with you. We knew that it was up for sale and there were negotiations. And our understanding is that it was purchased. There's potential questions about what that could look like. We don't know. But ultimately, the concept is really what we're focusing on. So the concept is an area that would be available that we could co-locate the 3 schools into one campus.
And if that were not to come to fruition, what does the idea about a 3 high school campus then look like for us?
Great question. I think we'd have to dig into that a little bit more, but the idea you'll see in terms of economies of scale, sharing resources in different ways, how some sort of hub model might be adapted so that high school students could together take advantage and have the opportunity to access co-located facilities. That's really the idea that's driving the high school approach. So ideally, it would be located in one area, or one ideal would that it would be located in another area, but we've seen other districts approach this very differently. So conceptually, the idea of access to all in almost one high school is in existence, but the actual facilities are located in different areas physically. So it would be the same concept still. It could be the same concept still, but physically it could manifest itself over various sites.
All right. Okay. Trustee Watts?
So I think part of that, what would that look like? I guess, so you're saying that this high school site would require 100
acres.
100 acres. So if we didn't have this piece of property, say for instance tomorrow they sell it to another person, they no longer, right? Like it's not an option. So you were saying that we could have this concept of a high school hub, but then you were saying you would have to, I guess, can you speak more about what that would look like if we?
Yeah, I mean,
Part B.
Yeah, for sure. It's a great question. And I can speak to ways it could look like, but I think there's a lot of work to be done between now and then to understand what makes the most sense for the district, right? But some schools or some districts look at a center with various academies, right? So different academies could be grouped and located in different areas. A sports complex could be located in an area, and we would try to group them as best that they make sense, but that all students would have access to those facilities. So it's more of a network model when thinking about high school, which can promote agency. It can promote a whole range of opportunities and activities for high school students that the 3 separate fully comprehensive high schools in terms of facility and building have challenges doing. And we're seeing some districts move in that direction as an innovative approach to high school.
Move in which direction?
Towards this more campus hub center approach.
The only one I'm aware of right now is Plymouth, Salem, Canton.
Yep, that
Here.
one's really close to here.
Is there another one that I'm unaware of?
So this is in Virginia, but
So it's not in Michigan.
not necessarily Michigan. Just thinking about the context of high school throughout the country and then even the globe.
Well, the only reason I ask is because if we didn't have 100 acres and we went to it sounds like, well, we've got the 3 high school campuses as they are now. So what are we doing? We're recreating it at a different, I mean, I'm kind of confused how that would work.
We could use those 3 campuses and think about programming. So a different program might go
So
into
that's
them.
different then, okay.
That's different. Or there are could be other blocks of land that could be purchased that could accommodate a certain portion or aspect of the program.
All right, if we can keep going through the presentation then.
Absolutely. So just some advantages of the hybrid scenario. We've started to touch on a lot of these already, but it's maintaining the neighborhood elementary middle schools that we talked about earlier. So some of those advantages such as access and the fresh start for middle school, increased parent involvement. There can be a wider range of elective opportunities and programming facilities for the high school because of that economy scale that we touched on. More interaction and collaboration opportunities for high schoolers attending different schools because of proximity. So uniting people together and a little bit closer. And then still maintaining the identity and legacy of the current 3 high schools. A few additional ones: centralized accessible athletic fields, simplified maintenance and operations when thinking about how to address high school all in the same area. High school adds centralized, enhanced community resources, and then also flexibility for long-term planning. So while we're suggesting the neighborhood elementary and middle schools today, this is going to be 30 years. So we would hope that it would be reevaluated at some sort of regular cadence. You still being able to use the dashboard as the working tool, but programming decisions could change over time. Then again, uses existing facilities to maximize project and phasing efficiency. So freeing up those 3 larger spaces allows the greatest amount of flexibility in terms of swing and timeline. Would you like me to pause or keep going?
Any additional questions on this one, Trustee Watts?
So in this scenario, we looked at taking Fortson and turning Fortson into a K-8.
Correct.
But in the first scenario, it suggested that it gets demoed.
No, Fortson would not get demoed.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It would just remain as Fortson High School. It would get renovated.
Okay, I'm sorry, renovated.
I thought it said
No,
new.
no, in the first
Says
one, it was
new.
going to be, it said replace, build
Yeah.
new. In the school-to-school scenario.
Then that would be an error. We would never, yep, that's an error. We would
I'm
not
glad I
suggest.
asked.
Yes.
That's what triggered my original
Okay,
question.
Okay, we would not suggest to build Fortson new.
Okay, I'm glad yes, because I was
Yes,
like, why
thank
are
you
we
for
saying
asking.
Okay.
Great clarification.
Okay, so that was the one that kind of did that. And then I guess with this, okay, so we can fix that. So with the hybrid scenario and taking these hypothetical 3 high schools and placing them in this land, I guess I'm thinking of all the logistics of saying busing, the road condition right now, because right now the roads all around there are 2-lane, 35-mile-an-hour. How do we anticipate the weight of all of those buses, and what would the road, in 30 years, what would we expect for the road commission to go ahead and say, this is what we can't maintain or be able to sustain the weight of these buses? I guess things like that, the security of having almost 7,000 students in one area.
Right across from 2 high school or college campuses.
I know that last year Plymouth, Canton, Salem, I say that because they had a lockdown, and it took 5 hours to go through the campus to be able to clear it. So I guess I'm thinking, because that's unfortunately our reality, what does that look like? How would we even foresee that?
Yeah, I can start, and then James, if you want to jump in. The security is definitely a great question. I think we always try to approach security with a layered system, so having different areas of the site partitioned off to try to maintain and regulate some of the security needs. In terms of traffic and planning for the future, once a site would be selected and this would be able to happen, it would go through design, a traffic analysis would be done to understand the implications, and then hopefully we could work with the city to understand more what that could look like over time in terms of 20 and 30 years. But that's all part of the design process. We haven't gone into that level of detail for this specifically because it's not a district-owned property, so we don't know where and how that'll actually manifest. It's really more of a concept, and this as a potential site. And if that potential site could be located not too far from where it's being shown in terms of central within the community, that would be ideal in terms of access.
Go ahead.
Well, and just with the location there, while you may be looking at Fairland Town Center, but Hyatt Regency and other businesses are on that ring road, I'm not sure how amenable they would be to having a high school campus interior to them.
So this scenario, again, all of these, we're trying to show a spectrum with this.
Okay.
So it just may be for all the reasons. I mean, this is what we're looking for is feedback. I think you also need to, with these would need to engage your community on this to have a conversation with as well. But also, there's definitely a lot further study that you'd have to do to understand, if you actually choose sites, there would have to be a lot of studies that would have to happen at that point. So what we're trying to show you is just as a concept, if you did try to consolidate your high schools and you think about sharing resources between the high school, even if they are somewhat distributed, and you go to more of this a hub approach. So, and we can show you examples once you start to get into, if this is something that that you like at all, we can get into examples of how districts have done this. Jesse was mentioning in Virginia, Albemarle School District, they went from huge land area, 4 separate high schools, and they went to what they called a distributed hub model, where it really operates as like one high school, but each hub had different like specialty. One was like a health sciences hub, another hub. And so as a student, you might actually access different kind of buildings, and they had to deal with transportation in that, but they really consolidated a lot of their resources. Rather than having athletics for 3 different high schools, they consolidated things in that way. And it does provide a lot more opportunities for students. And so these are things that we could definitely explore with you further. It's just, we are at such a high level right now with this that we're not able to study road conditions in the future and all of that. It's just really a scenario. It's an idea. If it's not feasible, then that's why we're showing you 3 scenarios at this point.
But 2 of the 3 use the high school campus, and if that, for one reason or another, is not going to be realistic
Yeah.
because we don't either have 100 acres to use, or it's not a reasonable fit because of a variety of logistical needs, then we're pursuing a concept that may result in a dead end. And I don't want to mislead the community that this is something that and then we get into the weeds and discover that it's a totally unrealistic.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the only reason I want to just
Yeah,
bring
yeah.
up the concerns that, early on, rather than,
Absolutely. The intent of this too, I guess we're trying to share with you again, a range, and what we're hope that will happen, and we're going to even show in the end an approach that we're going to recommend to engage your community. But what we would want you to do is to give input on this, so that way when you do approach your community, that we're showing scenarios at that point that you feel as a district that these are viable options that you would share. So we're not suggesting that these exact 3 that we're showing right now would be ones that you'd want to share with your community to engage on. We may hone that down into, it may just be 2 of them. It may be kind of one with some variations to it. But we're really trying to, we explored the whole range for you here, and we want to kind of hone in on what really makes most sense. So,
Trustee Barry?
Yes, what's the name of that district in Virginia?
It's Albemarle County Public Schools.
And I'm kind of waiting till Tom starts talking to us, because we might come back and say some of the other scenarios, cost-wise, won't make any sense. We might be leaning towards something like that. And just for the record, that's not the first time this was ever discussed. I think, I don't know if it's 11 or 12 years ago, there was a discussion, but it was at the building and site committee level, where you take Henry Ford College across the street to Fairlane, when Fairlane was a complete mess, for a while, because the thought was it would be a little bit easier to transform that building into college classes, then put the high school campuses on Henry Ford College. This is, I'm just saying, this was an idea, obviously didn't get out of the committee. But yeah, I'm waiting to hear what the numbers look like before we even start leaning anyways, if we do anything at all type thing, so.
Trustee Watts?
So so to clarify, and I think this is what I'm hearing in terms of like the centralized high school, we could have the centralized high school where we have 3 distinctive high schools, right? It would be Fortson, Edsel, and Dearborn High. But then what you're saying, what Virginia did, they have buildings that would house like the the science. So they would no longer be identified by high schools. It would be, say,
By program.
by programs, right?
Yeah, you could honestly do it different ways. And so we're not at that level of detail, but there are different options.
Okay.
Yeah. So what Virginia has, right, what Albemarle has right now is they have 3 comprehensive high schools with academies attached to them and a larger center, a few different centers throughout the district that students use and can access. And they actually, I would have to double check in terms of how they're operating right now, but when it was designed, they could even split their day, half a day they could go to a center and then come back. They could do, or a full day. I'm not sure where they are right now. And their district is massive. It's, I think, 729 square miles or something like that. So, so they had the transportation challenge, and then they chose to lean into that, use transportation, fund transportation, and they made that a priority. So that was a decision that they made.
And one clarification too, as far as what we've seen with a kind of this distributed hub approach is it's usually not, doesn't mean like you go to this building for science and you cross the street, go to another building for like math or social studies. It's really more of a thematic grouping. So you could still, as a student, spend your whole day in one building and get all the subjects you need, but it's more of a thematic base. So if you, let's say you're really into business and entrepreneurship, and so you choose to go to this building that all of the subjects that you're learning are around how can you apply it to entrepreneurship. Another one might be around science and innovation or health sciences and that. So you're still learning all of the subjects in one location. But a student may want to experience some different things, and there could be some opportunity where they do go across to another school. So it's really about just providing more opportunities to your students than having just 3 identical comprehensive high schools in your district. So we're seeing a lot more choice now for students and really getting more specialized into things that will really prepare them for the 21st century. So.
Anything else before we move to the 3rd scenario? All right.
Great. The one thing I'll offer before we move to the 3rd is that each one of the scenarios really was driven by the drivers and the engagement that we had with your community. So although we're recommending a good amount of additional engagement specifically around scenarios, we heard an appetite for change and innovation, which was really exciting. So we're not suggesting anything that we feel like contradicts what we heard. It's just at which scale we want to approach it, the school scale or the district scale. Okay, so community campus, this is that far right side of the spectrum, close to. So how might we increase access to enhanced resources and opportunities for all students and the greater community? So this takes the same approach to high school that we already discussed. The difference here is in the elementary and middle school. So here, we're proposing combining all elementary and middle schools into K-8s where feasible. Again, still each school would be renovated or replaced to align with that vision of learning and address all facility needs. For preschool, we're suggesting a different approach for this scenario. So preschool is housed here in standalone buildings, and then also in Salina K-8s. And so Salina is in the southeast, and just in terms of location, it made the most sense, we felt, to integrate that into that facility. But otherwise, it would be proposed special pre-K building, similar to how Cotter is currently. And then we have a proposed purpose-built special education facility on a former elementary school site. So here we're looking at a district total of 23 educational sites. So it becomes, it moves down from 30 to 23. So what does this look like across the district? Pre-K. These are the current flagged locations for pre-K facilities. And we can do that because we're freeing up those facilities as elementary schools and we're converting them to K-8. So here we have an even distribution of K-8s across the district. For high school, we're looking at the same approach as the hybrid model, so I won't spend too much time on that. The specialty schools, we still have a concentration on the west side, but we're starting to move a little bit east. This is similar in all 3 scenarios. And so what does this look like across the district? So the swing approach here would still, as a baseline, be using existing facilities to temporarily house students. We would be using Fordson, Dearborn High, and Edsel Ford. This is where we discuss that opportunity in terms of the swing space being what we're calling pathfinding, so being able to experience and exposing students and teachers to the future environmental model and service as professional development for teachers. So you'd be converting those buildings into their final homes, which would be K-8s for schools. So here we would also be prioritizing building the new high school campus first to free up Fordson, Dearborn High, and Edsel Ford to house students while their buildings are being renovated or constructed. In terms of timeline, we have the same working assumptions in terms of the design and construction cycle, but the overall time could be shorter using this approach if you wanted it to be. So obviously it can always be extended. You can move at a slower pace, but we're estimating that we could complete the 23 educational sites using those 3 swing sites in 22 years. So some advantages here. Some of these were actually already mentioned, but students attending a school for a longer period of time can equate to stronger relationships. So in terms of the elementary to middle school tenure. There's also can be a deeper connection to their school and an increased feeling of ownership when they've been there longer. They're better known by more adults. Then also older students can take on mentorship roles. Stability for young teens during a tumultuous developmental period. Siblings can attend the same school for a longer periods of time, so some families appreciate that. And then there's also been shown a staff gain satisfaction, seeing the students grow and develop from the lower grades to the upper grades. A few more advantages, and these are in terms of both the K-8 and the high school, so a wider range of elective opportunities, and from a programming perspective and facilities for high school because of that economy of scale we've already touched on. More interaction and collaboration opportunities, similar to the previous scenario again. You're still being able to maintain the identity and legacy of the current 3 high schools. Could create centralized accessible athletic fields, a simplified maintenance strategy, creates a central location for community resources, so as Dearborn as a whole, and then also larger communities when thinking about the K-8s in the center. Project and phasing efficiency is achieved here through the swing sites. And then there's opportunity to lease and repurpose unused properties because there would be quite a few unused properties as a result of this master plan when it's completed. So following this, we have a side-by-side comparison. So I can jump into that or we can pause to talk about the community campus approach.
Got one question, and it actually goes to both these scenarios since they both had the community high school campus. I have to assume that the timeline would be longer if you're looking at those because of concurrently working on multiple. So like the master planning could take longer. Would that sound correct?
Great question. So to keep working a shop, there are different ways you can do it and you can approach it. When you're looking at the community campus, I think the lift would really be on the programming side. So really understanding, digging in, figuring out what those schools want to look like in terms of how it operates day to day. So that design could be extended. That could also be separate, and that work can largely fall on the district in conjunction with the thought partner.
Okay.
Yep.
Trustee Petlicoff?
Okay, a couple things. When I look at slide 54, you talk about creates opportunities to lease, repurpose unused properties. We just demolished St. Alphonsus High School that had been vacant for about a decade at the very least last week. They couldn't sell the property. I was on the board when we sold one of our existing properties across from Beaumont Hospital or whatever, Corwell. How in 2016, nothing's been built yet. the owner, the original owner has now changed the game plan for what he wants to do with the site. It was going to be one thing, and now he's completely flipped it. The neighborhood is in an uproar and protesting what his change in plans are. As a responsible community member, I feel a need to represent the neighborhoods as well. What kind of impact are we going to be leaving on neighborhoods with some of these scenarios that could be leaving buildings vacant that we would either need to maintain until we can find a use, which we know right now commercial real estate is not in that high a demand. It may change, but we're talking about buildings that are really difficult. If we can't use them, why are we going to think somebody else is going to find a great use for them? So I'm just asking, are we setting the neighborhoods up for failure, housing markets to, potentially have issues because we're changing now? I'm not, like I said, I'm not going to be here 30 years from now, so it ain't going to affect me any. But I'm just considering it when those questions are going to be asked of me from people in the community.
Yes, all valid points. And I think that, with all of these scenarios, there's advantages and challenges, and that could be viewed as a challenge that way. And so, yeah, I mean, we're not going to be able to answer. We can't say that this is going to be, that solution would, there would have to be a lot of planning, a lot of conversations to even understand if that is a feasible approach to do that. And so if it's a con, that may be something that would steer you away as a district from that type of option. I think what you'll see, though, is when we get to the cost and you layer the cost on, you'll see a difference of, if you kept every single building, it's going to be more costly. And so this is going to be the trade-off that you'll have to decide as a district.
Well, what I'm really looking at is how do we have the conversation with the community who want to protect their neighborhoods and are seeing things happening right now today that had to do with school buildings, and we're asking them to put the faith in tax dollars into a project that may ultimately change the neighborhood culture and climate significantly.
Those are all tough conversations. I mean, I think what we're going to share at the end is you will need to do as a district. Our recommendation is some really extensive community engagement to have conversations like that. What it may mean, though, is if you choose to do a full addressing all of your facilities, it may be a more costly process or more costly to make decisions that do address every single facility that you have. And so I think that would be part of your conversation with the community, is to ask them, what they are willing to support from taxpayer dollars, because there are cost implications to all of these things. And that's the piece that we haven't showed yet that
Right.
we will get into next, so.
Anything else before we get into the next section? All right.
Great.